Okay, so we are here at the Southwest Festival of the Written Word. The title of the panel is Masters of the Genre. Look at science fiction and speculative fiction today. I'm Benjamin Klein. I'm professor of speech and communication at Western New Mexico University. And that's all you need to know about me. I'm done. Because what really matter here are the people we're here to see. If everybody here would please make sure their phones are not loud, possibly even turned off. And I had to make myself leave mine in my car because otherwise I play. But that would be good. Restrooms are right over there, so you should be able to get to those. The Southwest Festival of the Written Word is celebrating its 10th year as a fiesta. Our mission is to celebrate written and spoken word. We want to thank Western New Mexico University and the town of Silver City, and it's not on here, but also the public library is hosting us, so they should be thanked as well. For sponsoring this panel. We want to recognize that we are on Apache land here, that we respectfully acknowledge the entirety of Southwest New Mexico is the traditional territory since time immemorial of the Chinti, also known as the Chiricahua Apache people. So here's kind of what I'm thinking we're going to do. We're just going to mostly have a discussion with the panelists. I'll have each of you, I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves and your work other than your names. The reason I'll have you do that is I've got bios for you, but I've found that sometimes what's in the bio isn't necessarily what the person's thinking of themselves right now. And so I want you to tell us, kind of who you are, what your work is, what you're doing right now. So we'll take just a few minutes to do that in a second, and then I'll have each of you kind of present whatever ideas that you have about the science fiction and speculative fantasy today, what's different. And hopefully we can leave, at least 15, 20 minutes just for people here to ask questions. Maybe to ask questions of each other. I know I've already got some that I'm really curious about, so I wanna be able to ask those. So that's hopefully what we're going to do here. Is everybody good with that?
Sounds great.
All right. So the order I'm going to introduce you and have you talk just a little bit about yourself and what your work is the order I see you on the Zoom screen, right? So that's what I'm going to do. And so if that's not a happy order, I apologize. But we're going to start out with Julie Czerneda. Czerneda, I'm sorry, I even asked you and then I did it wrong. Czerneda.
That's perfect.
And go ahead, please, and introduce yourself. Talk a little bit about your work.
Okay, thank you. It's been relevant to this discussion. I've been writing science fiction and more recently fantasy, published since 1997. My background before that is in biology, and so the questions that biology has posed to me all the way through my life are the questions I seek to answer in my fiction. It's a lot safer for the world if I do it that way. It's also just such a wonderful place to play. And I think I've always written for myself. I've always written about the ideas I care about and the kind of characters I want to see. And if I was to make one sort of statement towards the topic of the panel, it would simply be that I see more of that now, and I'm very glad to. What drove me sort of mad about science fiction back in the 60s, 70s doesn't seem to be a problem. I can find my stuff. I have 23 books out from DAW Books. My latest science fiction is To Each This World.
Thank you. All right, and the next person on my screen is R.W.W. Greene. Would you please introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your work?
Sure. My name is Rob Greene, but I write as R.W.W. Greene because he's easier to find on Google. I'm a longtime sci-fi fantasy nerd And about 10, 12 years ago, I finally started to take myself seriously and started to write. I've got about 4 books out. My most recent book just came out this week. It's Earth Retrograde, published through Angry Robot Books. Earth Retrograde is a sequel to this book, which came out last year. And together they make up a story, an alt history of the 1970s to the present date. But I've replaced the Cold War with an alien invasion. And I have a lot of fun doing that. I think the reason I like science fiction is because I'm very interested in where we're going as a species, as the humans. I would really like to think that we're going to get out of the mess that we're in now and make it to the stars and have that utopian Star Trek lifestyle. One of the things that I always liked about Star Trek is that they carried weapons, but the weapons had a stun setting. And I like the fact that, that their first response was not to kill it, not to destroy it, but try to talk to it. And then if they have to, stun it or give it the old Vulcan nerve pinch so they wouldn't have to destroy it. And I like worlds that think about that. I was a teacher for a long time, a high school teacher in a very diverse classroom, and I had kids of color and trans kids and gay kids, and I really wanted to make sure that they could see themselves in the future that I create. So I try to write my books for them so they can see that we're all going to kind of try to get there together. So
Thank you. And the next person on my Zoom screen is Ness.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending the panel. I am an astrophysics graduate student currently studying up in New York City. And I'm actually super new to the industry. My debut novella just came out this year. This is The Scourge Between Stars. I grew up on a steady diet of science fiction and horror, actually. And so I knew I wanted to write in that space. I guess in a more official setting. I had been making little stories and doodles to myself kind of growing up, and I wanted to do it seriously as an adult. And a lot of my work is informed by my profession and by my training, which is in astrobiology and astrophysics. I was an astrobiology college professor for several years, and the conversations that I had with my students and the material that I taught them has truly inspired me to kind of think about what stories kind of lie in what we currently know and all of the multitudes of what we don't. And I really like to challenge myself to see how I can explore that given kind of what I know as a scientist. And it's harder than you think in some ways, but it's also really great fun. And so I guess in my writing, I focus on the intersection of science and storytelling, and also how our speculative storytelling today is affected by the ways in which we sort of no longer have a direct connection to the stars, to the sky, and in some ways a personal connection to science.
Yes, I really enjoyed Scourge. I liked your debut book quite a bit. I'm glad I get a chance to tell that to your almost face.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate that.
Okay, so the first thing that I'd want to do is if you can, and we can do this either way. Either I could do what I just did and say your names again, or you can just kind of do it popcorn style, as you feel, speak. Either way would be fine with me. But just some initial thoughts about science fiction and speculative fantasy in general today, whether it's your own work or work other people are doing. What is it that you see as the directions and the trends and what's good and what's bad and what's really exciting and what's not? Just kind of, if we could hear kind of those initial thoughts to sort of get the discussion going, I think that would be a good place to go.
Maybe we should narrow it down just a little bit,
Okay.
because you pretty well talked about everything being published in science fiction, fantasy, horror, and everything between. And I don't read it all. I'm sure not the others have their areas that they read more. So I'm just wondering if we could maybe just for now stick to science fiction itself and anything its appurtenances, as opposed to going into fantasy. Is that okay with everybody? Because that'd be another discussion.
It is. When you say speculative fiction, it can go really broad right there, huh? So yeah, we can focus it on. We can focus it on just science fiction, and even that leaves it very broad. And I was intentional about being broad so that you could talk about whatever you felt. But yeah, we can certainly narrow it down.
I'll say something, I guess, if that's all right. When science fiction is always kind of about, what's possible. And, there's what I've seen you go from Star Trek, like I said, with like the phasers and the warp speed, and that was really big in like the 60s. And then, the 90s was a time when we finally started like talking about like, maybe hyperspace and warp speed is going to be more magic than it is science. It's not something we can do. So you saw kind of a change in the range of stories. And, nowadays with like a lot of like the near future stuff, because, the science says that the next 50 to 100 years are going to be pretty scary. So you see a lot of like, not so much optimism in sci-fi, except for hope punk, until you get, like 200 years from now, or 300 years from now, or 400 years from now, where, we've kind of skipped the scary part and managed to make it off the planet, which of course is going to be much harder than anybody ever imagines. So it's kind of when I'm writing, and my first book is kind of far future, is set 2,000 years from now, and the book after that was 90 years from now, which is it's a climate fiction kind of, not, I mean, I think of it as post-apocalyptic, because the apocalypse is something that keeps happening. We just had the COVID apocalypse not too long ago, which is, apocalypse is really something very big that causes a change that, after which nothing is the same. And we're kind of in this this climate change apocalypse is happening now, and after which nothing will be the same. So it's interesting writing now, because if you do write the near future stuff, it's hard to deny what's going on in reality.
Okay. Thank you.
Did we want to introduce Melissa?
Oh,
Melissa's just attending as a
she's
member.
just attending as a member. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, she's just like in the audience. So, but we can still wave at her.
Hi, Melissa. Yeah, it's interesting, because for me, science fiction and scientific literacy are two things I always combine, and I often find science fiction readers are particularly scientifically literate, because they care about it and they don't take things for granted, and they read critically. That being said, there's nothing wrong with the escapism, and I'm not even going to say escapism. I don't think there's anything wrong with how much of science fiction very successfully offers us a path out. Even if it's for the afternoon we're reading, or it's a future we imagine, quite rarely in Star Trek. And they just give us that, except this one thing, that's willing suspension of disbelief, the what if. And then to me, the best science fiction still keeps it very rigorous and believable, because you're saying right up front, here's my contract with the reader. I've got faster than light speed travel. Accept that. I don't care if you think it's possible or not. My story is propelled from that moment. So it's still reader and writer and science fiction readers are really quite amazing.
Yeah, I think sort of reacting to what Rob and Julie are both saying, one of my favorite things about science fiction is that I think it's a way to, or I think it's similar to horror, actually, in my opinion, in that it's an avenue through which we can kind of grapple with some of our fears. And obviously the ways in which we do that in horror and sci-fi are very different. But, you know, from a sci-fi angle, I think there is often the thread of optimism in how we choose to attack or solve, or maybe even project beyond what we're dealing with as a society today. And I think that that's necessary. I think if there is no hope or quote unquote plan, it's easy to flounder, it's easy to remain stagnant, and it's also easy to accept the status quo, which is the opposite of what we should do in a crisis or in like a current apocalypse. And so I love that sci-fi has presented that avenue for so long, so consistently. One of my favorite, I guess, like Star Trek anecdotes is when my father was coming up, he was a huge fan of Next Gen, but his main problem when he would watch the series is watching the characters walk around with their tablets and, you know, performing X, Y, and Z action on them. And he was so adamant. He said, that's so unrealistic. We'll never have that tech. That's so silly. And now, you know, he does X, Y, and Z from his iPad. But the reason I like that story is because in that time, it was unrealistic. It was pure imagination. But I think what sci-fi does for us as a society is galvanizes us and really inspires us to ask the question, well, how could I manifest that? Or how do I bring it into reality? And again, I think the beauty of it is that it's done that for decades. And I think it will continue doing that as we face these all new challenges coming up for us here on Earth.
Well, that's just brilliant. And one of the things you may or may not have done this yet, but I'm sure it's in your future, is being asked to consult with a group of scientists or a group of grad students, looking at ways they can come up with different hypotheses, ways to think, you know, outside the box is literally what we do for a living. And it's, you know, just even, I remember even being asked by Kodak way back when, what would we do if we had, you know, paper that we could print, that would print itself? You know, it was just, oh, give us an hour and we would just barely get started. So that is, the nuts and bolts of science fiction actually is one of its powerful tools. You know, it just gets, I am sure that the flip phone absolutely came from the communicator in the first Star Trek. One of the things I really have enjoyed lately, and this pertains to both of your work, is looking at the hazards and the reality of space travel as we know it now, and telling really good stories in that milieu. I think of The Expanse as an example that was incredibly successful. And it just really began to show that space is not just hard, space is slow. And it's fast and it's slow at the same time, if you know what I mean. Our ability to move through it is so slow, and yet things that can have consequences to us are blindingly fast. So I would just toss that out if anyone had any other thoughts of space travel and the actual real kind of space travel and how good it is for storytelling.
Well, one of the reasons we have to have, you know, we like to put warp speed or hyperspace in our work is because, you know, the local neighborhood has not been super hospitable to life. You know, we don't have, there's not really anybody on Mars to talk to or combat with or fall in love with or anything like that. So we have to get out of the solar system in order for that to happen. But, you know, the truth is that, you know, that's probably where we're gonna, if we are going to make it into space, that's where we're going to be. We're going to, you know, we're going to be on Mars and we're going to be on the moon and things like that. So, you know, the whole like getting there story, like For All Mankind is a series on Apple TV, which starts with the idea that the Russians made it to the moon first, and you know, it's 3 seasons of like, you know, like everybody's like trying to catch up with the Russians now, and we get to Mars earlier, and we get to all these things earlier. You know, so those kind of stories are about how we got there. And, you know, a lot of people are interested in the stories about how we'll live there. And, then, once we get an idea of settling on Mars, then we can do, the murder mystery on Mars or something like that. We can do those kind of expanded stuff. But if you really want to get, if you want to meet the other, and find out who we are in comparison to the other, that we need to get out of the solar system, which is tough. It's really hard and takes a long time. What is it? 86 years to get to our closest possible neighbor. That's a long time. So we're kind of limited by reality, but it also presents a lot of possibility for conflict and stories.
Yeah, that was something that I enjoyed talking about with my students when I was still teaching, just kind of breaking down the current day difficulties in staging anything like an interstellar journey. And I mean, I hated to be the bearer of bad news, just kind of correcting a lot of assumptions about where we are in, the trajectory that we all maybe collectively, maybe even unconsciously believe in, where we're unbelievably far away from being able to get to the next star. And that would really hurt a lot of my students' feelings, and my own, of course, if I'm being honest. But I think that too is something that's really interesting to grapple with, just together as a society. In my debut novella, I have it where the characters we're following are on the return journey of a failed trip to the nearest star. And I wanted to do that because I do think stories where we have the tech, and maybe it's not a surprise or nothing uncommon in our world anymore, in our reality. I think that struggling with the in-between is really fruitful. And I also think it's a big part in making sure we don't take for granted what we have today, be it tech or, the planet we're actually standing on. So I think I have equal fondness for kind of both settings. And I think there's a lot of real and genuine kind of benefit to digesting both.
One of the things I really wanted for my latest standalone, I mean, I've written across the spectrum of science fiction, but this one, I really wanted to play by the rules of space travel. So, but I also wanted to have a situation in which it's 200 years after other worlds have been settled by people, and there's not been any contact, of course, because they're 100 years out. So it's 100 years back, and now the first probes are coming to say we made it. So, they got this 200-year lag in news. But I also wanted to look at the potential to get to stars that could be habitable in a reasonable way. So the first thing I had to do was get off here and send the first sleeper ship from Earth, to a goodly distance, so that it had a reasonable chance of being nestled in a section where there would be other, at least 6 or 7 habitable stars within that 100 at 1/5 light speed, something reasonable. And of course, I use there's sleeper ships which is a technology we can attain. So now it's all about getting them back to Earth and getting them back to Earth in a different way. So it was an interesting problem. I mean, I did a lot of maps trying to make sure that all of this worked. But you need constraints in a story as much as you need imagination. You know what I mean? That's what gives you that story as opposed to any other.
Yeah, I broke the rules quite a bit in the Earth retrograde, Mercury rising, because it's all history. I had Robert Oppenheimer come up with an atomic engine instead of the atomic bomb. So the distance between Mars to Venus can be done in 2 weeks, as opposed to whatever it would really take. Earth to Mars about the same, depending on where it is in orbit and what time of year it is and this kind of stuff. Just because it would be the story I wanted to tell, it would not be very exciting to watch these characters on a ship, traveling for months and months and months and months and months. I needed to get there a little bit quicker. But Yeah, yeah, so it's all, and but the first book was about, involved relativity. It was about an arranged marriage, and the one party in the arranged marriage was on a ship traveling at near light speed, so time passed very slowly for him, and the other person was planet bound, so she was in this arranged marriage before she was born. And by the time he came back, 2 years had passed for him and 26 years had passed for her. So that was a lot of fun to kind of play with the time dilation and the relativity there. So, you can use real rules and real physics to your favor sometimes, but sometimes you just have to, do the hand waving.
Lillian, I think Melissa's having a problem. This isn't the session she was hoping to be in.
She's being communicated with, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
One of my very first book, which was, as you know, I was just writing it for fun, and I just thought, what the heck? It deals with a serious biology question, but it's set in a wonderful space opera-esque future, and they do have faster than light, but again, you still have to get characters where they need to be. So one of my favorite inventions was a traveling supermarket that basically you could intersect with. So I at least halved my problem in being able to get people in the same place at the same time. Sometimes we spend more on the actual nuts and bolts of figuring out placement and time than on character, it seems sometimes.
So where do you decide, how do you decide what to make real and what to make, what to break the rules, as you said? Where do you break the rules, and where do you keep the rules? How do you make that decision?
I'll start. The decision for me is simple. I will break as few rules as possible, and especially in biology, which is my passion. Also, though, I'm very passionately interested and always have been in space exploration. So I don't like to break rules of astrophysics. Sometimes much as I love watching Star Wars and Mandalorian and stuff, I just go, no, you cannot do that. But anyway, it's okay. I love the stories. But for me, it's a case of where the setting has to be. If I want to deal with, I do a lot of first contact. I do a lot of aliens, meeting aliens. So I need right off the bat the premise of being able to get there. And in some books I've worked on the physics of it a little bit and tried, done the wormhole thing. And in some books I just say, accept that, because now we're moving into really strange places. But once I'm there, everything has to be following the rules that we know them. And one of the wonderful things for me in biology is that over the years I've been writing, my most imaginative leaps in biology have landed on solid ground. You can make up the wildest aliens and we have them here. So it's as if you can speculate all you want and you've still got that opportunity to ground it. And it's good for readers. They need to believe you. You're taking them on this faraway journey. But if you do something really silly that they know isn't right, if you forget gravity, whatever it takes, it gets them upset. If you forget to even have daylight coming in a window and waking someone up, readers won't stay with you. So it's also selfish, but it's also the way I like to read myself. I like to feel very immersed in believable world.
Yeah, I will say that is certainly like something I think about a lot when I write, especially because I am in a field where my colleagues can easily look at my draft and say, So that definitely keeps me on my toes. I think what I was really focused on with Scourge Between Stars was the kind of problem, or like the underlying issue that I wanted my characters to grapple with. That kind of informed what I chose to kind of keep well within the bounds of what we currently understand. And then, that helped me choose as well, what will I play a little bit looser with? So, for example, in the novella, my characters are able to easily get to the nearest star system. That tech is kind of hand waved, but it breaks down while they're there. And so when they come back, now we have to grapple with the extreme flight times, with the corrosion of cosmic rays, with X, Y, and Z. Now we're back firmly into kind of a modern understanding of hazards of space travel. And that is because I need my characters, kind of secondary to the active plot, I need them to take a strong look at what they took for granted about life on Earth, how that informed the treatment of our planet, how that informed the arrogance with which they moved on to the next planet. So I would say that when I was writing, part of what kept me within, this will play by the rules, this we can get a bit loosey-goosey, was what I wanted the characters to deal with and to learn.
I think I'm most interested in the social science. I'm interested in how people how they're going to react to like the situation that they're in. Like, how is a Ratso Rizzo type from 1976 New York going to react to being drafted to fight the aliens and being sent to the moon? And how is that going to pan out? And then within the bounds that I can, I mean, the moon has a different gravity than Earth, has a different gravity than Mars, has a different gravity than Venus. Mars doesn't have a magnetic field. So there's things that I'm going to make sure that I get right, because like you were saying, that there are other people who are going to look at that and say, no, this is not going to happen. But in order to make sure that they can get where they need to go, I am going to change some things. I'm going to because you can't have the acceleration of the Oppenheimer engine without some kind of inertia control. And, so you need that, or, everything's going to take so long. So you need to create some way for them to do this. And if you are trying to get people up to like 0.9999% of light speed, where time dilation actually matters, you're going to need for them to be able to accelerate really quickly, which again means you need to have some kind of inertial control system. So I think I make my decisions on when to hand wave, based on what I need to happen. I guess that's my long answer.
No, it's a great answer. I mean, it doesn't matter what you're writing. There's tech that you can just say, we're using this to get from A to B. We don't need to go under the hood unless the car stops working. And then suddenly getting under the hood and understanding how it works matters. And some of my favorites, I'll play more in short fiction. One of my favorite novellas that I did had nothing to do with us or people at all. It was purely aliens. And we meet them as they're constantly trying to find their original home, where they came from, where they evolved. And you learn at the end that this is because they have become so different from what they were, that in order to live in space, solely live in space, that their desire is actually to eradicate the original version. So they have to sort of to make the decision, the crew of the ship, who aren't too different now, to go back home anyway. Do they just go to home, or do they eradicate it, or do they tell them that it's there? So these are issues of what we are, what we become, what we accept from authority, that science fiction really does address well. It's a great playground.
It is. Well, it's one of the things I liked about Ness's book there, Scourge, is it had the tech, and then it failed on the way back. So you had to deal with both sides of it, which I thought was really cool, really clever, and really fun. And then there was another book I read recently that I can't remember, but they used the idea that while they're in cold sleep on the way to these different planets, that their bodies are altered by our nanobots or whatever to make them able to function better on the planet that they're going to. So if they're going to a high gravity planet, it'll increase their bone density and their muscle fibers and this kind of stuff. If they're going to a low gravity or a high radiation planet, it'll change that, and they'll have some kind of medication. So it's all about them prepping themselves for the planets they're going to. And I can't remember the book, but I thought that was a very clever idea as well. So
I did that a little bit, but I don't think mine is the one you're thinking of. But it's true. How to adapt ourselves is another, really cool area to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is a really cool playground. You know, you can, you know, just let your mind go and just like, you know, what if, and, you know, maybe that won't work, but, you know, maybe, you know, how can you even communicate, you know, those vast distances without, you know, 20-minute delay on the way to Mars. And, you know, it's just like, what do I do? So,
Tea.
yeah.
Lots of tea.
I want you to be able to fully answer any questions anybody here in our audience might want to ask. So I think that, you know, we've got about 22 minutes left. If we could open it up, what questions are questions that people here have?
Pressure's on, people. Pressure's on.
I was just thinking the same. They all look a little bit worried. Don't worry, don't worry.
It's okay.
We're not scary.
No, well, in the teaching world, they call that wait time. You know, you ask the question and you let that silence hang until someone finally steps up and says, "Well." So.
It looks like we might have gotten something.
All
Yep.
right, yeah, well,
Mr. Foster's here. It's
looks like Mr. Foster is here.
Fantastic.
Our last little bit. Mr. Foster, can you hear us yet?
Yes, I'm sorry if somebody technical got alarmed. I was in the middle of a paragraph and I had to finish it. You all know how that is before the thought went away. So it's finished and I'm not, so I'm here.
All right, well, thank you for coming. What I had everybody else do already, as we kind of went on one thing, but I had each person kind of talk a little bit about who they are and what their own work is.
Okay,
So would you go ahead and start out with that?
sure. I'm a writer and I write mostly science fiction and fantasy, but I've written Westerns and mysteries and a fair amount of nonfiction. And I do it anymore because I like telling stories. And I also compose music, which I started at the beginning of the pandemic because it's something I always wanted to do, and finding myself stuck at home for even more than the usual amount of time, I thought I would see if I could do it. And the people who've heard it, it's never been played anywhere, but the people who've heard it seem to like it. So I keep doing it. Will that suffice, or should I start at age 3 and try to continue?
No, please do not start at age 3, because I don't even know when that was. So one of the things that I did hear from all of you, from the other panelists, and you can certainly address this too. One thing that just kept coming up in the early discussions was this idea, both that the immediate future seems like it's going to be hard, but that our science fiction can give us hope. And I guess what I want to see us address is, what is it ethical to give hope in a world that looks like it's going to become so hard, right? Or does it give people a false hope that then they're just going to hope for, well, the technology will solve this problem, I don't need to even worry about it, right? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Sure.
Okay.
Has everybody else already answered, or?
No, this is my new question.
Oh, it's your new question. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the address for it is 423 East. No, I'm sorry. I'll try to avoid that when the panel is actually going on.
Okay, well, it is. So, yeah, that's the question. I go ahead and.
I'm reading this book right now. This is a nonfiction book called Nomad Century: How Climate Migration Will Reshape Our Earth. And it's both kind of bleak and wonderful, because it talks about how, you know, one of our strengths of human as humanity is we've migrated so many times over the history of our species, and that, you know, migration is again going to be the way to kind of save us from this situation that we're in. You know, by 2035, you know, we'll have like at least 1 billion climate refugees, and, you know, that seems like a terrible situation. But, you know, this book is postulating that if we get ahead of it and we figure out how to move people around, that it's actually going to be an economic engine and good for us. And there's a lot of hopeful storytelling that can be told within that context. You know, there's, you know, the second book I wrote, 25 to Life. One of the ideas there is that, you know, climate change has got to the point where most of us are kind of living indoors and kind of experiencing life through virtual reality. But there's this group that decides that, no, I'm not going to do that. We're going to be nomads and run around in our van life and like, you know, live the best we can on the road and, you know, find life that way. So I think there's always hope. And even in a bad situation, you know, even in the next 100 years being bad, we're still going to fall in love. We're still going to, you know, enjoy things and make music and make art. And it's not going to be, you know, death knell terrible for everybody. So I think, you know, giving hope is not only ethical, I think it's truthful, is my answer to that question.
I have a tiny story to related to this, because our daughter went through political science and she worked, you know, on human trafficking, and she did all kinds of things, and she was in her master's and really learning all the worst things about people. And she came in and she says, I don't understand how your books can be so positive. And I said, because it's necessary. It's necessary to imagine better, or how we even know where to get to it. And then she went to South Africa for a school term, and she came back and she'd actually been immersed in the writings of Nelson Mandela. And she looked at me and she said, he said that. Not that I quoted him correctly, but the idea that the one strength we have to bring forward is our optimism, and that leads us to then think of ideas and solutions. And if anyone's watched The Last Ship, which I really enjoyed, the TV series, the interesting thing is it starts with a pandemic before our pandemic. So it goes down that road of many science fiction stories about we're all going to behave as badly as possible and no one will help each other. And we all lived through a pandemic in which the world came together, got vaccines, stopped the virus, essentially, at least muted it. And that could have been another science fiction story, but a science fiction story with that optimistic bend would have been truthful, as you said. Then it's a thriller and you can't sell it.
I also think, because I've grappled with this question a lot, especially as I became more knowledgeable about the climate crisis, as well as, you know, when my training began to touch on, I won't call it the futility, but the extreme difficulty of establishing any kind of foothold on anywhere other than Earth. I was really thinking about this question. And of course, I thought about how previous systems in place probably seemed truly hopeless to certain demographics of people throughout history. And the only reason that those institutions and those axes of oppression were flipped was because communities began to spread hope, and that hope bred action. And, you know, now we see a world which, again, I'll use the word hope, but like we can hope, you know, we're moving toward, I guess, the overturning of even more of those systems. So I think that hope is an integral part of progress. I think it's necessary to protect the flame. And I think there is a bit of, I think in some ways it's deeply unethical to deliberately blow that flame out, especially, you know, if it's the people who benefit from a certain sense of hopelessness, doing so.
I'd love to claim some of the high ground here, but I can't. I don't write dystopian stories because I don't like feeling that way. Almost all of everything I've written is upbeat because I'm an upbeat person and I don't want to sit there staring at the computer screen being miserable. And there's plenty of people out there who have no problem writing those kinds of end of the world stories. It's just not for me. So I write stories that, even though they may have some dark moments in them, are on balance hopeful. And I do that even though I think we're running out of places for people to migrate to. I just ask everybody, if you want to know what's really going to happen as far as climate migration goes, keep an eye on Pakistan, which is a country with well over 100 million people that is rapidly drying out, floods recently notwithstanding. And I think that's where we're going to see the first making a prediction. I think that's where we're going to see the first mass movement, talking about millions of people moving because of climate change. So we'll see. I've never been there, so I can't say from a personal standpoint. But the signs, if you read about them, are for that particular part of the planet are not good. But I'm still hopeful.
I'm going to open it again. Are there any questions for anybody in the room? And if not, I've still got more. So,
Yeah.
but I don't want to silence. any-
Am I mistaken, or was this panel supposed to start at 11:30? I have no problem talking now.
Oh, you know what? It's 11:30 Mountain Time, so it started.
Oh,
And we've got 10 minutes left.
oh, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I wonder.
I'm just super glad to
That was
see
a
you.
good paragraph. Yeah.
No, I'm glad you're here. Well, especially since Mr. Foster is here, and you've been here the longest. But I want all of you who've been here on the planet, the longest of the authors. But so I'd be especially interested for that. But a lot of people who are watching this, oh, we didn't clarify, Mr. Foster. We are recording this. Is that okay?
Of course.
Okay. Everybody else has been okay, but I just wanted to make sure it still was, because we could delete it. But I think anybody who's in the audience now, I think that a lot of people who will watch this later on the library's YouTube may very well be hopeful science fiction writers, right? That they admire you and want to be like you, right? And so I think that's what we're going to be looking at. And what would you say is, and I think about when I was a little kid, I kind of knew what the science fiction training ground was. My grandpa got these analog and science fiction, science-backed magazines, right? He read them, and then he gave them to my dad, and then my dad would give them to me, right? And I would read those, and those were all new authors who were just getting things out, and it was kind of a training ground for early science fiction writers. And some of you may have started out with short stories in there. But what's a good training ground for science fiction writers right now?
That's actually pretty easy. It's the same it's always been. But first, let me say I've never been introduced on a panel before as the oldest living person who's been on the earth the longest.
No, just of these particular panelists. I am sorry. No, you.
Oh, that's all right.
I'll tie you. I've got you tied for that. Don't worry, Alan.
Okay. No, you do really. Wow. You don't
I
look.
do.
I'm sorry. I had to throw that's an
I'm
instinctive.
sorry, I didn't mean it. I just meant the most.
No. We're just having fun with you. That's what a panel's supposed to be. The way I was told,
Ness is older than all of us, so you can't tell.
the way I was told to learn about writing science fiction, or if you want to try writing science fiction, and this is going back more than half a century, was to read as much science fiction as I possibly could. Not just contemporary science fiction, but all science fiction, going back as far as I could find available material, because that will tell you what science fiction is. That will give you a general idea how science fiction is structured, and hopefully you won't spend a year slaving away on a novel whose basic idea actually appeared in Astounding Science Fiction by Ross Rocklin in 1939, which is the worst thing that can happen to you. You have to read a lot. This is applicable to any field you want to write in. You have to read a lot of what you want to do. Not just contemporary stuff, which of course is important, but older stuff too. And that's what I always tell students when I'm teaching a writing course or a seminar. I say, you want to know how to write science fiction? Go read it. You want to know how to write Westerns? Go read Westerns. Yes, the style may have changed. Some of the subject matter may have changed, but the basics of science fiction are still the same. It's what if.
And I would add to that, that's wonderful, is to find science fiction conventions, find the people that are doing it, because I've never met another group as welcoming, except maybe horror. Horror writers are really, really, friendly folks. But
You
and I
know?
didn't know anything about publishing or how to do it or anything. I was just writing my stuff until I went to my first convention, found out I'd done everything wrong, and was immediately introduced to people who helped guide my way. So, and it was fun. It was fun being with the people who get what you're doing, and everyone's writing at the same time. And that's another thing I would recommend.
I don't do it myself, but I also understand that fan fiction is a lot. I have a lot of friends who are professional writers now who did a lot of fan fiction, wrote a lot of fan fiction, and really enjoyed being in that space and really kind of learned how to craft a story in that space and get feedback from, because there's such a passionate interest in fan fiction. So that would be, you know, a place that, and also I know a lot of people who have been doing role plays, writing role plays back and forth, and kind of just building their chops that way too, before they, you know, start writing their own original stuff. And I think, you know, if that's something that you're interested in, then that would be a good place to also work in.
If
I'll
Ray
just jump in before,
Sorry,
sorry.
go ahead. No, if Ray Bradbury can start writing fan fiction when it was much more difficult to share, then anybody today, when it's much easier, certainly can.
Yeah.
I was only just going to say for the audience that fan fiction means writing in another universe. Like you write a story based in Star Trek, or you write a story based in whatever, you know, called to you, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. But just so that, in case they didn't know.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say that everything said so far is advice that I've tried to follow, and that I have found a lot of help and support in. So maybe I'm a bit biased because of what I do, but I also would really encourage writers to develop scientific literacy and really try as best, like whatever is within your ability, to keep abreast of science today. Because in my opinion, or at least, you know, what astrophysics has shown me so far is that the universe is much, much stranger than some of the things that we can come up with. And so if you can develop the skills to interpret kind of what's happening on the frontier of science, I think that there's so much to play with there. It's really just going to be a fountain of inspiration.
Especially now. I mean, it's so easy to get the information. I mean, the Keck lectures I listen to, you know, they come up with like near Earth satellites and, you know, exoplanets, and I'll just sit there, and they're free, and they're, you know, taught and offered by, like, you know, NASA scientists, and it's just fantastic. So there's just so much you can do really easily, really with very little cost to kind of educate yourself now. So that's a
And
great
before you're
point.
terrified in the audience, you can actually write something and then you can find an expert to read that for you, because experts would love to make sure your science is right. So if you don't have to be paralyzed in your writing because you don't necessarily know something, if you want to, there are people who are more than happy to take a look and read it for you.
There's a
You
lot
want
of
to write
online communities that do that kind of thing too.
You want to write science fiction, not fantasy. They are two separate things. Just remember, you don't want to be overwhelmed by the tech. You just want to do your research. And remember what Arthur Clarke always said: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So you always have that backing you up.
Well, we've got 4 minutes left.
I have a comment.
Oh, so
Hi, Alan and gang. I'm Ted Pressler. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining. Quick question
Yes.
for you. Rockwell Anyoha, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, has written a piece called The History of AI. And he starts off by saying that he claims that the AI subject began with a heartless Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz and continued with a humanoid robot that impersonated Maria in Metropolis. And then he goes on to talk about Alan Turing and so forth. I just want to throw out this question is, in your view, when did the mainstream science fiction really identify AI as a first time?
There's an easy question.
You know it was.
I haven't read everything, so I can't say. I'm sure there's somebody with an encyclopedic knowledge of everything that's been written in the field, and I certainly can't say. We could start with Asimov with his robot stories. We could probably go back further than that to Carol Kapik and RUR. But I can't say. Although Metropolis is not a bad place, to start. I want to throw something out for everybody here, by the way. A friend in London just put me onto this. If you want to see what's really being done with AI as far as synthetic imagery of humans, there's a website called We Are Kaleida, Kaleida, and I guarantee you, you will fall on the floor when you see what's being done, synthesizing people like Prince and David Bowie. You will not believe what you see. I didn't believe it, and I had to go back and forth. And all of this is so recent, the advanced development of it. I can't even imagine what it's going to be like in 20 years. I just hope maybe I'm around to see it, but I can't answer your question honestly because I haven't read everything. So that's the best I can do.
If I'm not mistaken, both the word robot and the term AI are science fiction terms. So we certainly were, there's a lexicon, the Oxford Dictionary has produced a lexicon of words that were first cited in science fiction and have become mainstream. And it's thousands of words. So you can Google that and have a look. It's really fascinating and fun to see. And it does cite the original work. So that could be a way to find out. But I know AI is a very interesting one. I remember writing, being in a panel on AI, not to go too long on it. And I went home and immediately wrote an impassioned story called Left Foot and a Blind Man, in which a prosthetic limb develops intelligence and sentience and a will to survive, which really you don't want in an appendage. So you can, I've been playing with it for a long time.
Yeah, I could run with that, but this is a not safe for work kind of thing. So,
Right.
sorry.
Well, I think actually the TikTok man would be the AI in the Oz books, because the Tin Man used to be flesh, so he's more of a cyborg, I think, than an AI. But I believe that if you look at, like, Greek and Roman mythology, that the forger god there, Vulcan Hephaestus, had created automatons to work in his workshop that also had some of their own will. So it might go back as far as the mythology. We're always making metal men and metal women that do our will, and sometimes they aren't happy about it. So they may go that far. I mean, I think the first sci-fi story is really Icarus, and Daedalus, because he made a machine to fly and didn't use god power or magic. He hand waved the fact that you'd have to flap your arms, but I think that was the first sci-fi story. It's been going on for a long time.
I would very much like to know what you're working on now, Alan, as we get near the end. I've been a big fan of your work.
Well, there's that novelette that I'm talking on. There's that novelette that I said I was working on the paragraph. It's a long novelette. It's called Dead Man's Tale, and it starts out with a guy committing suicide and goes on from there. So, and it's science fiction, it's not fantasy. So I'm working on that. And I'm working on my 7th Symphony. I'm on the 2nd movement. Maybe someday somebody will play some of this stuff, but very few people know that I do it. It's not, except for one piece, science fiction or fantasy oriented. It's just music. It's all for orchestra. It's for full orchestra. And that's what I'm working on at the moment. There's a horror novel, a short horror novel coming out from a small press, probably early next year. And I've slowed down certainly, but my wife needs attention. She has some health problems, which is why you haven't seen me at cons in quite a while. Although I'll be at NASFIC if anybody pops up there. And I miss it. I miss talking to y'all. I miss interacting with y'all. And this is a nice way to do it. It's not the best way to do it, but it's a nice way to do it. So that's what I'm working on, since you asked.
We are 2 minutes over. I was told by our librarian that it's okay to go over, but also there are other places, other panels people need to go to, and this particular festival is all over town. So sometimes you have to drive to the next panel. So I do want to go ahead and end it. I want to thank you all so much for being a part of this. And yeah, Zoom isn't the best way to do things. It's not, but it does make sometimes things possible that wouldn't be otherwise. And I'm really glad that you could all make it. And I'm glad for the technology that made that possible. I want to thank you very, very much for coming. I think that I learned a lot. I hope everybody here in this room learned a lot. And was entertained. I was also entertained. So I really enjoyed this. So thank you so much for coming. Everybody just give a hand for our panelists.